And it's really interesting to know also how Armenia is able to enjoy this impunity, because as you say, there are real facts and arguments which demonstrate, from your opinion, it demonstrates a clear position of Azerbaijan and Armenia. So there are documents which should attract the attention of all international community and international institutions, but still Armenia enjoys its impunity and explains that there is no any progress in the negotiation process because Armenia has to deal with so-called authoritarian regime in Azerbaijan. How can you comment on that?
There are perhaps two questions in your sort of comments. Yes, very frequently, especially Azerbaijani public, pose a question why indeed Armenia so far enjoys impunity. It occupied Azerbaijani territories. We have United Nations Security Council resolution, though Armenia denies kind of responsibility and they're trying to distort the nature of these four resolutions. But we know that these four resolutions clearly indicate that occupational forces, all occupational forces, should be withdrawn from the occupied territories of Azerbaijan. So there are several factors, historical and some other factors I would like to elaborate. I would like to quote American scholar Thomas Ambrosio, who said that Armenia enjoyed permissive international regime in the 90s, specifically in 1992 and 1994, when Armenia occupied 20%, almost 20% of territory of Azerbaijan. First of all, the reason why Armenia enjoys impunity is because the religious factor which Armenian nationalists using against Azerbaijan. On every occasion, Armenian nationalists were trying to say that this is the conflict between Christian Armenia and Muslim Azerbaijan, and taking into account quite strong stereotype, especially in Western media, among Western public. You know, this is a well-known phenomenon called Orientalism among social historians and anthropologists. It's the concept developed by Edward Said. This perception that if conflicts happening between Christian and Armenians and Muslims, between Christian and Muslims, something should be wrong on the Muslim side. And Armenia always trying to say that this is the country Christian outpost. But what's the reality on the ground? We know that Armenia enjoys very good relations with many Muslim countries. First of all, with its neighbor Iran. Yerevan has very good relations with several Arab countries, diplomatic relations. Sometimes even we recently, there was conversation about delivery of weapons from Jordan. We know that in May this month there was footages of Iranian trucks on the occupied territories of Azerbaijan. So this is the myth which Armenia developed in the West, that we are Christians, we are victimized. And then related to that, it's the history. Armenia using history, the all events of 1915, trying to distort sometimes historical facts. For example, well-known reference to Stalin. You know, even many Western experts and historians, when they speaking about the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, they think Stalin gave Nagorno-Karabakh to Azerbaijan. There's nothing true in this claim. First of all, Stalin in 1920, 1921, when the question of Nagorno-Karabakh was under consideration, Stalin was not the sole and omnipotent leader of the Soviet Union. There were several in his ranks. The second, we know that the decision which so-called communist authorities, Kavbureau, which is called in Russian Kavbureau, Soviet authorities of the Caucasus adopted, it says to leave Nagorno-Karabakh in Azerbaijan. To leave, in Russian, оставить. To leave, that means that belonged to Azerbaijan. not to give. And there are several factors which Armenian nationalists is trying to portray, or let's say to put forward and try to hide some other facts. For example, the big chunk of Azerbaijani territory, Zangezur, was given to Armenia. If we're speaking about Stalin, how it happened that, for example, Lori region in Armenia, it belonged to Georgia. And in 1921, Lori was given to Armenia. So where was Stalin about? Stalin was Georgian. So, and you know, for Stalin and some other Soviet bureaucrats at that time, it was just a game to end the ethnic conflict, to solidify the result of military occupation, and to create what we indeed later created, the Soviet Union, and the element that was the Caucasian Federation. So nothing true in that statement, but Armenian nationalists, we have long, for many decades, almost for century, Armenian diaspora living in the West. There are some historians, Armenian public activists, advocates. We know how to work in the Western media. We know how to work in Western academia. We're trying to put forward these myths, these falsified facts into the textbook, etc. So that's another reason, history. Third reason, victimhood. Armenia always trying to portray themselves as, again, related to other factors which I mentioned, that were victims of the centuries-old oppression by the Muslims, by the Ottoman empires, by other empires, Muslim empires. But we know that the Armenians enjoyed quite good status. For example, in the Ottoman Empire, Armenians was called Millet Sadiq, that's the loyal nation. So relations between Turks and Armenians was very good. In Safavid Empire and some other Qajar empires, Armenians had even privileges, for example, to trade silk, exclusive privileges, and some other privileges. So it's nothing true, again, in this also claims of victimhood. But especially related to events to 1915, Armenians tried to portray that. There are some other factors. I mentioned them briefly, speaking about self-determination. You know, if we recall that in February 1988, Armenian nationalists began this campaign for unification with Armenia. It was still the Soviet Union. And the liberals in the West, they saw this conflict in the Caucasus as something which can disturb and destroy the Soviet Union. So many liberals jumped to support Armenian nationalists without going into details. What's going on? What's the history of the conflict? And further on, Armenian, especially diaspora in the West, they managed this campaign well in terms of attracting liberals, saying, you know, we're trying to get freedom from the Soviet Union. Nagorno-Karabakh is trying to get freedom from Azerbaijan, Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians. So it sounds quite well, I mean, for the liberals in the West. And, but it's not, again, nothing true in this sort of nationalist, expansionist policy, which is, you know, based on the idea of Great Armenia. And now speaking about the Pashinyan, or you mentioned that the Armenian side claims that this is the fight between democratic Armenia and the authoritarian Azerbaijan. This is now the sort of cliche. On every occasion, Armenian diaspora organization speaking about that. Okay, if that's true, let's for a moment to be the so-called the devil's advocate. If it's true, then the Armenian side should nullify, should remove the legacy of the previous regimes, Sarkisian and Kacharian and some others. And the legacy of the previous regime, Ter-Petrosyan, is the occupation of Azerbaijani territories. That's I think the very important factor. They claim that they became democratic in 2018 and they're trying to restructure, refashion their society, country, the government, then indeed the legacy of occupation should be removed. But the truth that indeed the democracy, so-called democracy in Armenia, has peculiar character. We know that all the scandal around the Constitutional Court, which basically the current government, Pashinyan government, removed judges acting contrary to the constitution of Armenia. They tried to bypass constitution of Armenia because through the parliament, and they did that. So many international observers now speak about violations of human rights and etc. in Armenia. But overall, I would like to stress that speaking about our region, yes, all three countries, they should continue their reforms. They should improve their governance, their system, but let's abandon these cliches, you know, especially again, these Armenian nationalists, they're using cliche like Stalin gave Nagorno-Karabakh, and now they're using another cliche, oil autocracy. So we, you know, dealing with the propaganda war. And when all these cliches, oil autocracy, you know, and another, for example, I'll give you just example, caviar diplomacy. Yeah. We're accused that we're using caviar diplomacy. Well, let me tell you, every country on earth, almost, especially countries with some either problems, conflict, or with some ambitions, United States, France, UK, Russia, China, middle powers like Azerbaijan, some other countries, Armenia, we're trying to enhance their network. This is the normal thing. It's called diplomacy. You're trying to find the friends, you're trying to find the like-minded people. And also Azerbaijan tried to do that, and I think it's the legitimate course of actions. What is not legitimate is bribing someone. But let's look at the jar of caviar. Yes, it's not cheap food. It's $200, $300 or euros on the market. But can someone imagine that you can buy politician in Europe with caviar? It's ridiculous. Let's look at the other kind of diplomacy. Someone speaks about Armenian conic diplomacy. I'm leaving that aside. In the United States, Armenian wealthy people, they investing millions of dollars into American politicians. You know, the cost of elections in the United States, I've heard different figures, but indeed enormous. It's the peculiar character of American democracy when the congressman or the senator should spend between $10 to $30 million for the elections campaign. It's a huge amount of money, and they're collecting the donations from people, from the corporations. And Armenian businesses, especially in California, in Massachusetts, they're giving quite generous donations to American politicians. Why nobody speak about that? Why jar of caviar outweighed all these politicians?